So I've got a couple breaks in the talk for questions and answers, but I'd like to really keep it informal. So if you have a question, just shoot your hand up and interrupt me, call my attention. We'll kind of make this much more dialogue, hopefully, than a formal presentation. One apology, I guess, from the get-go. I Googled my own talk title a couple days ago because I was in a pinch and I wanted to see if I could just look at something real quick. And I found someone else's talk from 2 or 3 years ago, a K-12 educator in San Antonio. So this is not my original title, and so even though that person's not in the room, I do apologize. The last thing I want to say is, ironically, I'm going to basically talk at you for an hour and try to tell you that talking at people for an hour is a bad way to tell them anything. So as your attention gets diverted, as you can't help yourself but check your email, please know that you're not a bad person, but please also realize that your students aren't bad people. And it's just hard for us to pay attention for an hour at someone talking at us. And the whole point of the Flipped Learning Initiative is to kind of work around that and keep learning more engaged. And I'll do my best to pull out some bells and whistles to keep you engaged as well. So when I looked at your initiatives here at UMass Dartmouth, I saw that you pretty much have a good, robust flipped learning and blended learning program going on here. So as much as you probably don't need it, it is worthwhile to say that we're talking about flipped learning. This is now the formal consensus definition of flipped learning from the Flipped Learning Network. That's flippedlearning.org. And I won't read it to you. You can read it there over my shoulder. But essentially what this definition says is that passive background instruction is moved out of the learning space. That's the classroom. And instead what's moved into the learning space is more engaging activities, more formative learning, more hands-on learning. The reason why I put this up here, even though you guys seem to be pretty much along the way already, is that this is the flipped learning definition. You might see there's nothing about technology up there. There's nothing about recorded videos up there. Flipped classrooms now traditionally refer to the technology piece of that. When recordings are made, when lectures are recorded, when students are watching lectures at home, that's a flipped classroom by the true kind of consensus definition. Flipped learning has nothing necessarily to do with technology. It's just about moving passive instruction outside of the classroom so that you can do more interesting things in the classroom. So as a quick overview, I'm first going to try to get the pulse of the room and see whether or not you guys are resistant to flip or not, and then I'm going to take you through my course. 1 week in my course from beginning to end. I'll tell you how I achieve the online instruction, what methods I use in order to get passive learning into the students' rooms. I'll talk about how I use reflections of that learning for formative assessment as well as accountability, for at-home participation. Office hours in class, challenge questions, and fun days are my 3 in-class activities that I use, and then we wrap up with quizzes. I'll stop for Q&A at that point because that's kind of the mechanics of how I run my classroom and just get some input from you on what rings a bell, what doesn't, what would you like clarification on. And then I'm going to tell you about some more recent work I did, which was a comparative study between a flipped and an unflipped section, but a little bit different than the traditional studies that have already been done. I'll share some of the data with you. That'll be the first time I'm sharing this data with anybody outside of my home institution. So critique away, poke holes, I'd appreciate it. We'll break for a Q&A again, and that'll be the end of the talk. In an effort to demo some technology pieces that you might want to use in your classroom, if you haven't heard of it already, todaysmeet.com is a great, free, anonymous back-channel platform for communicating with students in the background during class time and having them communicate with each other. If you have in-class tutors, they can moderate this back-channel chat, and I'll have this running today all during the presentation. So if you navigate to www.todaysmeet.com/dartmen, that sounds like a superhero, it wasn't intentional. It's supposed to be Dartmouth, Menella. You'll come to a back channel chat. It'll prompt you for your name. You can use any name you want. You can use Apple, Orange, Superhero. It won't prompt you for a real name. No login is necessary. And that will be open for about 5 days. So you can continue the dialogue long after I'm gone. And I'll check in once in a while in the days to come to see if anybody's contributed anything. So I've got a screen here with that running, and post questions or comments as we go along. So while you have your device out, if you'd like to participate in the poll, and we can do it by hands as well, if you go to www.pollev.com/tmen, that's poll everywhere. That's a free, online, again, anonymous, if you choose to make it, anonymous platform for student response. This is kind of the clickerless clicker idea, where you can have clicker technology in the classroom, but you don't need iClickers to do it. And if you'd like, please respond to the poll. Are you resistant to flip? Maybe you're not. Maybe you are because of the newness of it. Maybe you are because of the if you're not lecturing in class, what are you going to do? I mean, we're so used to standing in front of the classroom and holding lecture. If the lecturing is going on at home, what do you do in class? Maybe you feel like your students need you. They need those lectures. How else are they going to learn the material? Or maybe those top three are true. So I'll give you a second to participate in that if you'd like. You should see the responses yourself pop up once you log your answer. So as these continue to come in, there's already a clear majority. The vast majority of the room is saying they're not afraid to flip, and that's awesome. It's not a hostile crowd. So just looking for ideas, and hopefully I'll be able to provide you with some. I'm not ashamed to say that if you asked me this question 2 years ago, E would have been my answer. I felt all of these things. The newness of it really did freak me out. I enjoyed lecturing. My student evaluations were strong. I was a pretty good lecturer. I communicated well with students. Learning outcomes were good. Everything was working. Why would I try to fix what wasn't broken? I really didn't know what I would do in class. I had no idea how I would fill class time. And I'll admit to the narcissism as well. I was so good at lecturing, you know, why would they need anything else? And I'm so glad I made the switch. The classroom is completely different. So before I flipped my classes, I'd heard the term module. I had no idea what a module was. It was a term associated with my LMS, but I really didn't get what educators were talking about when they spoke of modules. Now I get it. Each week of my course is its own kind of self-contained repeating module. And let's assume for the sake of example that this course, this arbitrary course, meets on Mondays and Wednesdays. On Wednesdays in the middle of the day, 2 full-length hour and 15-minute lectures open up for students to access and watch online. We use Tegrity at Baypath. I'm very, very happy with it. I heard recently that you guys use Camtasia, or at least you have access to Camtasia. Tegrity is an institutional subscription service. None of the recordings are housed on our own servers. They're all uploaded to Tegrity servers. I like it because it allows the students to have a lot of control. They can bookmark my lectures. They can mark sections as confusing. They can send me an email directly through Tegrity, and when they do, I get a timestamp of where they were in the lecture when they had that question, and I can kind of zoom there. They can comment on the lectures and let me see those comments or hide them from me, so it's pretty good on the student end side, and it's very easy to use as an instructor. Just to kind of say that I'm not getting any money from Tegrity, Echo 360 I've heard about, and it's equally well liked. It's a very good subscription-based service. What I've heard quite a bit from Echo 360 users is that they're very willing, the company, to come and give you free demo, give a limited user licenses, and basically the same bells and whistles come with Echo 360. If you're not comfortable with Camtasia, but you do want to pilot this, VoiceThread is an awesome free online service that's available to anybody who wants to provide an email address. It's pretty limited, but if you have an educator email address, they give you a little bit of the extra features. What I like about VoiceThread is that it's iOS friendly, but it's also got a web-based platform, so students with iPhones and iPads have a very nice VoiceThread app, which is also free. And also what's nice about VoiceThread is that students can comment on the lecture. So students can add a slide or two where they voice over, without kind of overwriting your lecturing, and say, this part right here is not clear to me. And that becomes part of the thread. And then you can voice over and say, well, let me clarify that for you. And that all becomes part of the larger file. That can be specific to just you and the student, so not every other student needs to hear that online conversation, or you can open it up to everyone. A really, really nice free service from VoiceThread. Those are all high tech, but again, this is flipped learning, not the flipped classroom. So there's another free option that all of us are welcome to use called doing the readings. Remember when students would do the readings and they would come to class prepared? I talk about flipped learning a lot at my home institution, and invariably a professor will come up to me at the end, usually angry, a little bit contentious, and say, I've been having students do readings and they've come to class for 20 years, and I don't understand why I'm not part of this new sexy flipped learning thing. And I'll ask one question. Are the students accountable for it? Do they either have to take a quiz, write a summary? Do you know that they're doing the readings? The answer is yes, you're doing flipped learning. As far as flipped learning goes, that's flipped learning. If background instruction, passive instruction is occurring at home, and students arrive to class prepared with that background knowledge, that's flipped learning, no matter how you do it. So you can always use readings for this as well. What's important is that the students are coming to class prepared, that there's at-home instruction occurring in some way, shape, or form And that opens up class time for more formative learning activities. So in my class, remember, those lectures opened up on Wednesday. Now it's Sunday. That means the students have had 5 full days to watch those 2 lectures, those 2 full-length lectures, which together total 2.5 hours. They'd have 5 days to watch them. I think that's fair. I think that's a fair amount of time for them to schedule and kind of, get their act together and get those watched. Then those students submit on Sunday evening short reflections on each of those lectures. And this is the format of the reflections. The student is to write the concept from this lecture that I understood best was, and they name the concept, because, and they say why it was so clear to them. The concept from this lecture that I understood least was, and they name the concept because, and they state what was confusing. That's it. That's the reflection. No summary, no pages and pages, go on and on. That's the nature of the reflection. And I tell the students, if you spend more than 5 minutes on each reflection, you're spending too much time. I don't want to read a long report. You shouldn't be writing a long report. And it's very intentional because I follow a very strict 1 to 1 hour policy in my courses, where if we meet for 3 hours a week in class, I don't give them more than 3 hours of homework at home each week. So if they've spent 2.5 hours watching lectures already, I only want these to be 5-7 minutes each. These reflections are very powerful. They provide formative assessment. They give me a snapshot of the entire class's understanding of each lecture. What was most confusing, what was most clear. So I can see the class as a single entity, yes?
Do you do that as a sort of whole kind of thing, so you can just see the overview, or would you do that like as an individual written response? If you've got 50 students or something, that would be pretty time.
I'm going to jump ahead. I do it as individual responses. Again, I tell them, I even admonish them. If they're too long, I say, this is too long. You're killing me. Don't make this so long. In the genetics course that I teach this way, I usually have about 40, 45 students. And this is the dark side of the flipped experience, but I'll say it up front. Every single semester feels like a new course prep semester now. It is a lot of work, but the students learn so much better. And you'll see, I kind of, just a second, you'll see how I can get around answering each individual reflection specifically in how we treat class time. So yes?
Just to clarify, you said if you have a Monday, Wednesday class, you make the 2.5 hours of lecture available on Wednesday for that day or for the following?
No, I picked up at the end of the module. So lectures opened Wednesday after class, and then they have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday to watch them submit reflections for Monday. Equally important, or maybe not quite so important, as seeing the class as a snapshot, I also get a kind of a longitudinal view of each student. So if a student is struggling week after week, lecture after lecture with the most basic concepts, that's time for intervention. I've got to go to that student and say, we need to start meeting weekly. There seems to be some basic problem with comprehension. Do that diplomatically, but that allows me to track student to student. So I get both the snapshot view of the class per lecture and the long-term view of the students individually as they go through the course. But remember what I always ask that kind of contentious professor who's challenging me on her readings is an accountability piece here too. If they didn't watch the lectures, they can't really answer these reflection prompts effectively. And I can tell if one student, lecture after lecture, finds the most understandable concept, the concept that came in the first 2 minutes, and the most confusing concept, the concept that came in the 3rd and 4th minute, she's not watching the lectures. Bay Path is an all-female school, so forgive me for referring to undergrads as she. That's a force of habit. So students know they have to watch the lectures, or at least get through most of them in order to answer these reflections appropriately. And although it's a little bit Big Brother-ish, Tegrity does allow tracking as well, so I can log in and see which students are watching which lectures and for how long they're watching them. These reflections are graded. Individual feedback is largely given to students. And now it's Monday, so we arrive to class. And class begins with office hours in class. I start each Monday by reviewing the small, select few topics that the majority of the class reported were most confusing. Okay? Almost without fail, there is a single or a small set of concepts that the vast majority of the class said were the most confusing. And we all know whose fault that is then. If most of the class is struggling with the same concepts, the responsibility lies with me. I didn't explain that sufficiently. And to get back at the question before, now a lot of reflections can be answered by saying, I'm going to go over this again on Monday. So hold tight, and if it's still confusing, go ahead and get back to me after class. So I do a lot of copy and pastes in my reflection feedback, because if it's that majority concept, I'll say, we're going to cover this again.
The reflection is this Sunday at the teaching Monday. How many students do you have? Because my problem is that I teach Monday. Usually I have my students meeting Sundays to teach Tuesdays, so I have Monday to work their responses and prepare my own work.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do this.
I'll
Sunday midnight or
yeah, Sunday 8 p.m. is the due date.
Oh, they have a due date.
My kids go to bed at 7:45, so it's all intentional. Kids go to bed, and Sunday night from 8 p.m. to about 11:30, I'm grading reflections. Yeah.
Because I usually give them the whole day, so it's until midnight.
Yeah, yeah. So the reason why I call this office hours in class is because I kind of hold myself to a personal policy that what I would normally do for one student in office hours, and I'm sure we all do this, where you have a piece of scrap paper between you and you start sketching things out. What do you understand? Where do you get stuck? Okay, let's take it from there. I do that, but I do it on the whiteboard. There's no slides prepared. It's all kind of informal, office hours in class, quite literally. I talk to the class as though they were a single student and try to clarify the misconceptions that they expressed in their reflections. Never am I introducing new material in class. That to me is a big no-no of the flipped learning initiative. This is not an excuse to give yet more content. The chance to deliver new novel content is now in the online lectures, and class time is for reinforcing and fortifying. And not, I think, not to get through more chapters than we did before. Once we've gotten through office hours in class, and I'm relatively content that I've recovered that material effectively and in different ways, we move on to challenge questions. Challenge questions are study guide questions. These are exam-like questions that the students can expect to see again in the future. I have them just prepared as simple text PowerPoints. I project them up on the screen. Students separate into groups. Sometimes I count off into groups. Sometimes I let them self-select. Kind of depends on the mood of the room. And the students work through those challenge questions. I'm there to be called over whenever they get stuck. I steer them, coach them, give them some hints, put them down the right path. And then students either volunteer or they're compelled to volunteer, which means I call on them, and they share their answers to those challenge questions. Whatever is good about those answers, we hold on to as a group. And then we as a class continue to discuss that answer, mold that answer until it's the right answer that I would be looking for on an exam. So never is there kind of this, nope, that's wrong. Anybody else? Okay, what do we like about that? What about that answer is strong? What can we take from that? All right, somebody else add to that. What did you come up with? And together we formulate correct answers to these challenge questions. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Sorry about that. You get the preview in reverse. Now it's Wednesday. So again, Wednesday is fun days. I'm not sure how much fun it is for the students, but I try to make it fun. Now on Wednesday, students are using the information still from those online lectures, information we rehashed and reviewed during the office hours section of class on Monday, and we go through this material in novel, kind of fun, engaging activities, again in groups. There's some high-tech ideas that I use. I call one on-the-fly presentations. I really like this. This is my go-to idea. I'll say, okay, students don't know about these challenges before they come to class. They arrive to class, they're naive to what they're going to be asked to do, and I'll say, okay, if it's a genetics class, as soon as I'm done talking, break up into groups, go out, leave the room, or stay, and for half an hour I want you to go and find 5 images that to you best capture the main concepts of mitosis, cell division in biology. Collect them, annotate them, put them in some platform that you can present easily to the class. And when you come back, be prepared to show these pictures to the rest of us, tell us why you picked them, why they're important, and how they capture the main themes of mitosis. You have half an hour, ready, go. And they go. If they leave the room, we can use today's Meet in order to keep a virtual classroom. And the outcomes I've had from these on-the-fly presentations have been enormously impressive. I'm not exaggerating when I say I was a chair of graduate studies when I held my last position before BayPath. I dealt with the graduate students quite significantly. And some of these on-the-fly presentations that were put together in half an hour, truly on the fly, were superior to prepared graduate master's level presentations that master's students did ahead of time and presented to the department. So they come up with some really, really good stuff, both creative artistically as well as very strong on content. One idea that's worked well, BayPath is an iPad institution, so there's an app called iMovie, and iMovie has a really nice, simple interface for making movie trailers, so students are sometimes asked to make movie trailers, supporting topics from the class. Clicker-based activities using Poll Everywhere or Socrative, another web-based platform that's Android and iOS friendly. These are kind of straightforward clicker-based activities where you give a series of questions and students respond. But then there's no tech. Case studies are always a go-to source. Anybody in the room who's a life sciences instructor, the University of Buffalo, SUNY Buffalo's case study repository is a wonderful resource for case studies in science. Mind maps are always a really good way to see if students are understanding, especially a nonlinear concept. This you can do with a piece of oak tag and some Sharpies. Can students sketch out a nonlinear concept as a mind map? You presented it linearly. You had to, because time goes from beginning to end. Did they get the nonlinear nature of this? Do they see all of the connections? Can they represent that in a schematic? A very nice activity to go to. I've done mock trials where we put DNA mutations on trial. Are they innocent or guilty of hurting the human genome? There's a case to be made on both sides. And so students broke up into a defense team, a prosecution team, witnesses, and they kind of constructed their own mock trial. And we had to decide, are mutations beneficial or not beneficial? And it depends on the perspective you come at. So these are engaging, sometimes fun, information-intensive activities. They're graded for effort, not for quality. But here's the secret, and it's the secret I tell the students in the first week of class. All of these are thinly veiled excuses to get them to revisit the material during class time. No matter what we're doing here, we're studying. We're going back to the notes. We're going back to the lectures. We're using the information that was presented in those classes. We're getting the students to talk about that information, debate with each other, and recall that information more effectively and understand it better when they have to go back to it later. The end of class on Wednesday ends with a quiz. The quiz gauges the students' basic mastery of that whole week's learning objectives. Did they get what I thought they were supposed to get? And it's Wednesday. So what happens on Wednesday? Lectures open up. So sometime in the afternoon, after class is completed, 2 more lectures open up. Students can watch those lectures up until Sunday evening, and we gear up to do the whole thing again. It's an ongoing cycle. This is kind of a brief rundown of what I do. I was asked to do a guest blog post at the Emerging Ed Tech blog. So if you're interested in getting a little bit more detailed view of how I run the class, you can go ahead to that URL and read about it. Or if you just even Google "Never Teach Another Way Again" in quotation marks, it'll come up as one of the first hits. If we take this to Bloom's taxonomy, I personally believe that this kind of structure really allows an instructor to hit on all levels of Bloom's in a way that at least I wasn't doing before in a traditional classroom. At the basic level, the remembering level, we have the online lectures, that's the passive delivery of content, and the in-class office hours kind of supports that and gets at the remembering of facts. Their understanding, the students are asked to reflect on their own understanding of the content when they submit those reflections. And the in-class office hours are meant to promote understanding. You were confused, let's hit it a different way. Let's try to get this across in a new and novel way that you might understand. When it comes to applying the information, students have the challenge questions by which they can apply the information. They have to take the information that I delivered, but now answer new and novel questions that I never taught before. These aren't regurgitation challenge questions, they're applied questions, and think about the material critically. When students volunteer their answers and we mold those answers into the right answer that we're looking for, that requires analysis of that content. And one student or a group of students says, well, I'm not sure that's entirely correct. Maybe we need to add this piece to it. And so that's the analysis part. And it goes without saying that the Wednesday activities are the highest level of Bloom's, the creation and evaluation of new and novel learning materials based on what was presented in class. So that's how I run my flipped class. And this would be a nice time to stop for any questions you might have. Yeah, please.
So you said in-class office hours. Do you also have out-of-class office
Oh
hours?
yeah, I have to. I'm required to hold 4 hours of office hours a week.
So it's more like discussion points of things that were brought to your attention.
Yeah, that's right. So if half the class or more reports that a concept is confusing, it'll go into a little digital list I keep of topics I want to review again in class. It's only office hours in class because I kind of run it that way, informal, sketching on the whiteboard, you know, not really formal lecturing. Yes?
How do you handle the snow days or student absence?
I love both. I got all my colleagues running around scared to death because of all these snow days. Now, I should say I don't teach on Mondays, so it's easy for me to stand up here and say it's no problem. I know I pity anybody who has Monday classes because this has been a crazy semester. But absences and snow days, I mean, the main content is occurring at home. So they can still access their lectures, they can still give me the reflections. If we lose a whole week, which we did, I think, 2 years ago, we lost a fair number of days. The office hours in class I do using Explain Everything or any other tablet-based, so I'll just kind of review those concepts informally on a tablet and post that video for them to watch. We've got a pretty significant commuter population, but the students know about today's meet. So the challenge questions, they can work together if they dorm on campus, or they can use some collaboration platforms to work together on challenge questions outside of class. So it really only comes down to the fun day activities that I can't mimic outside of class. And I was going to say it at the end, but the fun day activities have been the most expendable. They were the ones to get the most negative student feedback. Students felt like they were a little bit more busy work than they were academic. So I spend the vast majority of my in-class time on office hours and challenge questions. The students like it better, and it seems to go. I just thought the fun day would kind of break things up, but they don't want things broken up. So snow days, absences, no problem. I had a student with a long-term illness where she couldn't come to class, but she was on her feet, and she came back to class after 3 weeks of being gone, completely caught up. We didn't even have to meet. She was fine. She had the online lectures. I was recording my office hours in class for her and letting her have access to those videos. She was submitting reflections. I knew where she stood. I was able to exchange emails with her and just clarify some specific things. She came back without any problems. So it's been beautiful in that way.
I have a question for clarification. I don't know if that's in response to the snow day or so the challenge questions. Can the students know what they are before that class, or do you present them in class and then just post them online?
Yeah, that's exactly what you said second. So the first time they see them are in class because I don't want anybody preparing ahead of time. I want groups to come in naive, but from the moment they see them onward to the end of the semester, they remain available on our LMS. So they can always go back to them. And then my study guide is really just all of the challenge questions thrown together into a single file, some of which we got to, some of which we ran out of time and didn't get to, and those are the exam guides.
I just had to, your student population, do they come to you pretty savvy with technology, or do you have a course that students take in order to understand how to use the technology?
It's a great question. They come thinking they're savvy, but they're not as savvy as they're savvy with Facebook and Instagram, but they're not really savvy with technology. So now my whole first week is, I do the basic course policy syllabus thing on the first day. I think we all do that. Day 2 of the first week is a tech crash course. I give them student-friendly prompts for using Prezi and Ziga. Tell me about your summer vacation kind of thing, tell me about your family, and I give them extra credit points for that. And we do that in class. So I say, okay, if you have any technical hurdles, let's get to those now. I also prepare a kind of, I wouldn't say a mock lecture, but a lecture that I know is well below where they're at, a review lecture, kind of an overview of the whole course. And I say, watch that lecture and submit a reflection on it during the first week of class, and you get extra credit points for that as well. So it gets them logging onto Tegrity, it gets them submitting reflections. So essentially, the students should have done all of the technological components of the course before we hit the material, and I can take care of any snags that they might have encountered beforehand.
In your opinion, how do you think this has affected your face-to-face time with your students?
One thing I didn't anticipate, I thought, okay, students rarely come to office hours as it is, but now it's going to be great because I'm clarifying everything in class. And the first time I taught this way, my office hours picked up significantly. I mean, there was heavy traffic during the office hours, and I was saying, oh my God, it's not working, they're not understanding anything. And the questions that I was getting at office hours were very deep and insightful questions. And I'd never gotten questions like that before. And then it began, again, this is empirical, but it dawned on me personally, that they're understanding the material now at a level that they never understood. So whereas before so much stuff was just going over their head and they were making flashcards and just trying to skate by, they're understanding the material now and it's piquing some curiosity. So now they're coming to me and saying, how exactly does this? I'm not satisfied by the half a slide explanation you gave in class. How does this work? And so I don't know if that's a measure. FaceTime's gone up because students are more engaged in the learning, and I think learning at a deeper level.
Are the lectures that you haven't watched modified in any way? Are they essentially what you would have been doing before?
Yeah, they're what I was doing. I have plans of what to do in the future. I haven't found I want to chunk them into learning objectives, but for now, they're the lectures. I didn't know if this was going to work. I kind of dove into this feet first before many people around me had been doing it. So I didn't want to reinvent the wheel if it was all going to bottom out after one semester. So I just took my PowerPoint lectures that I had been using and recorded them and put them up there, and that's what I've been working off of since. But one summer I plan to significantly change the delivery of the content. Hour and 15 minutes. I keep to what I would have kept to in class time. So if I have a 50-minute class, I'll keep the lectures to 50 minutes, 3 of them. But I only teach on I teach on a 2-day-a-week schedule. So I always had an hour and 20-minute block, and the lectures are about an hour and 15.
What's all the feedback you get from the lectures?
First semester I ever did this, it was, oh, you're kidding me. And I put together a course trailer ahead of time that they could watch through the LMS to kind of tell them what I was doing. I laid the case out to them the way that I would want someone to lay it out to my daughters. This is why I'm doing it. This is why I think it's better. And in that first talk, I said, we're not going back. Like, I'll modify, I'll wiggle, I'll bend, I'll change details, but this is what we're doing this semester. And if you all hate me 15 weeks from now, I'm really sorry, but we're doing it this way. I didn't want them to be any chance of mutiny on the ship. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that at the end of that semester, I had, so that was for a different course I teach in the spring, cell and molecular biology. I had students I'd never met before coming up to me for genetics and saying, are you teaching genetics in the fall? Yeah. Is it flipped? And I'd say, yeah. I'd say, oh, good, 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 good. So word was getting around that this was working. And it's working. I mean, students do better on exams. They're learning the material better. So sometimes it's a shock to the system that, like, I actually have to do 2.5 hours of work at home when I'm used to doing maybe none. But once they start getting these exams and realizing, I know this stuff, then they buy in. They buy in. So I practice full transparency. You know, I'm not the dictator. I'm just the president, and this is what we're doing, and this is why. But we can't change once we go down this course.
So I understand that you check the reflective statement to see if the student really watch those videos. But what if student persistently still not watching the video and okay to get punished by not getting points for watching the video?
I don't punish. I post my notes too. I post all the text from my notes, and that's part of the opening spiel too. I'm not paying $30,000 a year to be here. You are. So if these are all the learning resources I've generated. Now with the experience I have under my belt, I say it works. Students who participate in this structure learn. They not only do well in the class and get A's, but they learn. If you don't want that, then it's your money and your time. I mean, who am I to tell an adult that she needs to watch these lectures? So yeah, I kind of give the guilt trip saying you're hurting your own chances of doing well. But it's the same as reading the textbook. I mean, I think we faced this long before flipped learning. We have all these things we would do, homework and readings and all these things to fortify the learning, and a good number of our students didn't do them, and we knew that, and like, what are you going to do? I mean, how many of you are starting to encounter that students aren't even buying the textbook? They're not even buying the textbook now. And so, like, here's what I've done, and I have some data to support it works, and if you play along with me, you're going to learn, and it's going to be awesome. But if you don't want that, then okay.
Just to make sure I'm understanding, can you clarify again? I think you said if the class meets 3 hours a week, you don't give them more than 3 hours long. Is that what you said?
Yeah, 2 hour and 15-minute lectures, so 2.5 hours of lectures, plus the reflections that are supposed to be 5 minutes a pop, so that's 10 minutes.
But the videos, the lecture itself runs an hour and a half, but you still meet the 2 days a week and you give them the lecture that it's an hour and 15 minutes.
Yeah, so my lectures are recorded at the same length they would have been delivered in class. So if I was going to be standing in front of them talking at them for 2 hours and 40 minutes, Now I'm on their computer talking at them for 2 hours and 40 minutes. And they're supposed to be, I mean, let's all laugh together when I say it, they're supposed to be working 2 hours at home for every 1 hour in class. I just asked them to work 1 hour at home for 1 hour in class, right? But the rule of thumb for higher ed is for every credit hour you're in a classroom, you're supposed to be studying and working 2 hours at home. That's the rule of thumb. No one does that. But I say that at the first day of class and say, hey, I'm taking 50% of your workload off. You only have to work 1 hour in class for me.
Along with that, do you assign a textbook and reading out of that? If you're already giving them the homework of watching a lecture?
For genetics in the fall, it was the first time I ever made my text recommended instead of required. I think 2 people bought it, and they were sorry they did. Everyone did fine. Okay.
This is my first semester of not requiring a textbook too, and I'm posting readings and reflections.
Yeah. My provost heralds it as this huge success, right? Oh, look, and I said to her behind closed doors, that, you know, this last fall was the same as all the other falls. Most of them didn't buy the text. Now it's just official. Okay, so, yeah, with the remaining time, should be plenty of time, I'll present some of that data from that study. So I wanted to not just do another flipped learning study. There's so many studies out there in so many disciplines where somebody teaches a section as the sage on the stage and they lecture. And then they teach the same course, a different section in the flipped learning format. And except for one controversial study, every study supports that flipped learning is more effective on retention, on student engagement, and all kind of measurable variables. And I didn't want to do that for 2 reasons. One, it's been done plenty of times before, but 2, I'm so personally convinced that this is the better way to teach that it would be me intentionally putting the students in the unflipped control group at an academic disadvantage, and I was not comfortable doing that. What I wasn't sure about, what I wasn't convinced about was, is flipped learning better because we're doing this stuff in class versus homework at home? Or is it that I'm recording my lectures now, I'm prompting for reflections? In order to create a flipped classroom, you're actually creating a whole lot of learning resources that you wouldn't be normally creating in a traditional class, and maybe that's the advantage. So the yin-yang symbols here are meant to represent that it was truly a scientific study where the 2 sections were flipped. I lectured in class for the unflipped group. They had to submit the same format reflections as the flipped group. What was clear, what was not clear. I gave much more detailed personal feedback, which was extremely time-consuming, but I gave them feedback to try to clarify their misconceptions. Those challenge activities were assigned as homework for the unflipped class. So they were doing those challenge questions. They were doing those activities in groups, optional, but they could have done them alone as well. And they were submitting those through the LMS. I was grading those personally as well. So that was a lot of extra work. And then the flip section was as I just described. They were watching the lectures at home, submitting reflections, and doing in-class activities. And here's the data. First off, the misconception that students hate flipped learning is not true. I polled them every 3 weeks to get their pulse on the group. This is one data point of that polling. There were others as well. They all basically showed this trend. Overall, how would you rate your overall satisfaction with the course? The flipped group almost always was happier than the unflipped, but you can see that nobody was really truly unhappy. Only the neutral scores went up here or there. And this is a pretty hard unit, so everyone disliked me during the second 3-week span, but that's because we go over some pretty hard genetic concepts there. This was a genetics course. But you can see that the flipped group was either more satisfied or arguably equally satisfied as the unflipped group. So they didn't mind it at all. Other questions were the kind of, would you recommend this to a friend? Do you wish you were in the other section? And almost all of them were happy where they were, interestingly enough. Students could self-select. Because scheduling conflicts, we couldn't kind of put students in individual sections, but they did not know that it was going to be flipped and unflipped. What the students were told is that the flipped section, they didn't know it was flipped, the flipped section was going to be more technologically heavy, more technology involved. So that was the only differentiation in their choices. Here are the quiz grades, week by week, unflipped in red and flipped in blue, and there wasn't a single week where the unflipped section outperformed the flipped section. And you can see by the standard deviation bars, there's no real statistical significance there, but there is a trend where the flipped group is doing better than the unflipped group. These are those same quiz results, but now cumulative over the entire semester. The quizzes were out of 5 points. That's why the total averages are out of 5 points. Probably most strikingly, these are the exam grades. 3 exam grades as well as a cumulative final. These are essay-based exams. These are exams that are not multiple choice, no matching, pure essay-based questions. They have to do real deep thinking here. Again, questions very similar to their challenge questions. And you can see that there's some stark differences. Some of these are statistically significant. This is a statistically significant effect. This is as well, and I'll admit I haven't had time to analyze the final exam data yet, so I think that it is just based on looking at the data, but I can't say for sure. Some pretty stark differences there. So the flipped section is outperforming the unflipped section in quizzes and in exams. Student satisfaction is essentially comparable. There were a few red flags in all of this, though. I tried to really approach this as a scientist. I'm a trained molecular geneticist. I was a bench scientist for about 8 years, and so I really wanted to do this as a true study. And there were some indicators that the flipped class was stronger academically, independent of flipped or not flipped. And so I was able to, through a double-blind system, get the overall GPAs of the students in the class from my chair, and I was able to grade match. So what you're looking at in this table is a total of 8 students in the flipped section or unflipped section where the GPAs were either identical or within 2/100ths of a point of each other. Okay, so these are students with the same overall GPAs, and then in this column is their exam average in genetics. And while there's some variation from student to student, oftentimes the flipped student outperforms the unflipped a little bit. The overall averages across all students is basically the same, and the statistical significance, or more accurately, the statistical lack of significance, is a p-value of 0.26. So there's no difference between these students. They performed equally well when grade matched. And this is that same data plotted in case you're more schematically oriented than numbers and tables. Again, basically superimposable best fit curves. So take-home messages. Not surprisingly, at least to me, what I get from all of this is that there appears to be 3 main ingredients to effective learning. Getting the background material, reflecting on your own learning, what was clear and what wasn't clear to me, and then going back and manipulating that content, whatever it is, at a deeper level, using it. Right? For any of you who have been taught anything mechanical, whether it's a sports thing, how to throw a football, how to swing a golf club, how to change your oil, this is how people learn. Someone shows you, you ask questions about what wasn't clear, and then you do it with them looking over your shoulder, and you've learned. So we've known this. We've known this all along. This is how people learn effectively. My data suggests that perhaps it doesn't matter much where these steps occur, in the classroom or at home, as long as you're delivering background content, asking for a reflection of learning, and having students manipulate that knowledge in a deeper level. But at least in college classrooms that I have formally taught and I have formally sat in, these 3 ingredients don't typically occur in the traditional sage on the stage lecture-based college classroom. Usually just the first one occurs. And in my opinion, flipped learning best addresses and achieves all 3 of these, because when I addressed and achieved all 3 of these aims in an unflipped format, I was drowning in work, giving personalized feedback again and again. It was a much more efficient use of time to hit these 3 aspects in a flipped classroom. And so I still contend that flipped learning is the most effective teaching and learning approach currently being used in higher ed classrooms. So I suggest that you give it a try, and hopefully you'll be as amazed as I was. There's my email address if you want to reach out to me. I'd be happy to continue the conversation. I confess I've just started on Twitter, and so I have 1 follower. Even my wife isn't following me yet. So if you're Twitter active, I could use all the followers I can get. That's a shameless pitch for Twitter followers. And thank you for the invite. Thank you for the time. I kind of cut through how I grade the class just to give some time for question and answers, but if you're interested in how I grade, I can go back to those slides as well, and any other questions that you might have on anything. Yes?
So you talk about the high-tech and the low-tech, but it seems as if your experience is on the high-tech. Is there any reflection on what the low-tech flipped activities are and the impact of the results?
Yeah, so
what would the low-tech look like? I mean, I know you mentioned reading.
Yeah, I can't say if it was intentional or not, but BayPath recently went iPad, and they're doing it as a rollout. So freshmen got iPads last year. New freshmen got them, so now we have 2 years with iPads. But BayPath is a pretty middle-class student body, probably pretty synonymous to what you guys have here. And not everybody has technology. So even though I do have a lot of technology in my class, and the campus has a lot of technology that's active, I have, with some intent, formulated activities that don't require technology. So mind mapping is the perfect example. Students might have all the technology that I have in front of me now, but they're just not comfortable with it. And they'll say, can I draw the mind map and just snap a picture of it and submit that through the LMS? And I say, sure, yeah, as long as it's digital in the end and you could submit it through Canvas, our LMS, I'm fine with it. So students are often doing no-tech versions and just snapping a picture of it. And if you don't use the LMS, you just want to collect paper, then they can submit those things to you. So the mock trials require no technology. The clicker things, I mean, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the old-fashioned clicker system, but you can put, you know, A, B, C, and D on 4 different popsicle sticks and hand them out to the class at the beginning, and then do, you know, how many people think B is the right, and everybody holds up their stick. So you can find no-tech workarounds for all of these activities, and they're just as effective. Every once in a while, the technology just gets in the way. Other than that, it's kind of just bells and whistles.
I didn't quite follow your data analysis with your GPAs. Were you looking at exams that students took in your class, or so it looked like there was no better exam scores when you correct for GPA between flipped and unflipped?
Yeah, that's pretty much the take-home message. So the GPA column in each field here is the overall GPA, the cumulative GPA of 8 different students in each class. And this is their overall exam average in genetics, the flipped groups versus the unflipped. And so what you're saying is true. If I average out all of the exams of these 8 GPA matched students, I get a 78 3/4. If I do the same for students with equal GPAs in the unflipped section, I get 77.5. No real difference. So I'm not comfortable saying that the flipped students learn better metrically because the data doesn't cleanly show that. But I'll always come back to, my big fear in this is if I ever publish it, that people are going to latch onto it and say, flipped learning doesn't work. This is not your traditional unflipped class. Students were doing a lot more at home. I had 25 students getting individualized personal feedback from me 3 or 4 times a week. Even when I taught unflipped, I never taught unflipped like this.
What is the end for this study? How many subjects did you have in this?
I had 21 students in the flipped section and I think 25 or 26 in the unflipped.
So if you were able to do it with 200 students, you might find significance.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the biased human being in me really wanted the flipped group to be a lot stronger, but the molecular geneticist in me has to stand by the data, and the data doesn't cleanly show that there's a significant difference.
How large do you think you could scale up the, like in class office hours that you're talking, or those kinds of things? I mean, if you're working with a section of 100 students,
yeah,
do you think you could make that work?
With TAs? I mean, you know, I'm a big believer that TAs don't teach the class, but I came from a large university, and so if I had a small army of TAs, if I had 4 or 5 TAs, and I could assign them, you know, 20 students or so each, that they graded the reflections, because the reflections are graded just that you did them. There's no real grading. There's no such thing as a bad reflection. You either did it and you get the points, or you didn't do it and you don't. So if the TAs could just kind of scan through these, and each TA give me a summative report at the end saying, this is what the majority of my 20 found was most confusing, I think you could make it work. But one single professor responsible for a large number of students would be overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have TAs for that purpose. In a class of 20, I spent, maybe it's just me, but I just spent 3 hours reading through their reflections and giving specific feedback, because that's just what I do. But,
yeah.
You know, if I had 200 students, I wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah, yeah. You'd have to cut corners. I mean, when you scale up, you can't just simply scale up. But I think it's possible as long as you have the right support and the right infrastructure in place. There's algorithms now. I don't have any personal experience with them, but there are algorithms that will pull out common themes in submitted reports and generate its own summative report. I don't know how well those work, but for anybody who uses the Yahoo News app that gives you 2 daily digests, robots write that. They're pulling content out of a large number of news articles and writing their own news articles based on it. And they read real clean. I mean, you'd swear that a human being wrote them. So these algorithms are getting better at reading or analyzing and writing written work.
You could even do tag cloud, I suppose, on responses and see what keywords come up.
Yeah, and you know,
starting point.
Not to go too far in it, but once you've done this once or twice, so I keep my lists of most confusing concepts from previous semesters, and they are superimposable. I mean, you know, there are a core set of concepts in each lecture that are just complex, and they throw students for a loop. So once you know what those concepts are, and we can probably all identify them for our class without any student input, we know what's complex and what's simple in our lectures, we could just kind of do a poll everywhere and say, vote for your most confusing. Here are 10 concepts, vote for the most confusing, and that's the reflection in a way. Wouldn't get at the accountability piece because you could just kind of get at it.
Literally what we were just saying, if there was a way for larger classes to set up an assessment in the LMS. So instead of the polling feature, just have it be a multiple choice question. If you're covering 5 concepts in a lecture, which one worked best, and they just select the concept, and then maybe their because is just an additional comment box. Yeah. That way you get your, you know, what worked, what didn't work, and then that could kind of give you a better picture of, wow, the majority said that this didn't work. Let's go through those comments. So it's a way to filter the information into you instead of having to go out and kind of analyze it all.
My only concern would be it's a lot easier for students to skate by and not watch. But you know, peer pressure is working too in the class. When it was new and there was a fairly large number of students not watching the lectures, clearly not. By fairly large, I mean 5 or 6 students. But in a class of 20, that's a big chunk. You know, every weekend with a quiz. So I hand out the quiz, and I've got 16 heads that go down and start writing, and I've got 5 other heads that are looking around, and you can see in their eyes, they're saying, like, how do they know these answers? Well, they watch the lectures. I mean, you know, so the students who were resistant to it, except for one, the first time I did this, they all came aboard and started watching lectures because they were struggling without it. Anything else I can address, clarify? All right, well, you have my email address, and feel free to follow up with me. Thanks for coming. Thank you for the invite.